The time is now for another edition of the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner, and for the last 6 years, I have been working alongside Bob, originating our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I am joined by Grant. How we doing?
Doing great, Tan. Super pumped to be here. This should be a fun episode with the NFC South.
Yeah, it's another, like the AFC South, it's another one of those divisions where all the teams have pretty low win totals, but there was a lot of changes this offseason, so we have plenty to dive into today.
Yeah, well, let's dive right into the New Orleans Saints. So the Saints are the favorite to win this division, and their win total is set at 9.5 after going 7-10, and they finished 11th in weighted DVOA. The Saints started Jameis Winston in the first 3 games of the season, and he went 1-2 before getting shut down with that back injury. They turned to Andy Dalton, who would then go 6-8 for the remainder of the season. And this was the Saints' first losing season since 2016. But it was also their first year without head coach Sean Payton since 2006, minus the Bounty Gate year. This team has now found their franchise QB, and they're going to be looking to build on this second year of this Carmichael offense. How do you feel about this pairing?
So Pete Carmichael, offensive coordinator, is a Sean Payton disciple, and he's, brings that same frequent use of screens and short passes, those kind of precise stick routes and slants that we know from Sean Payton. But Carmichael did take some more downfield shots last year than Payton typically did. And I don't know if that's a circumstance of, philosophy change, or it's just that Drew Brees is no longer under center in New Orleans, and basically anyone, including Andy Dalton, is more of a deep passer than Drew Brees. So Chris Olave had 27 targets last season on passes with 20-plus air yards, and that ranked 8th in the NFL. And now Michael Thomas is back to run those underneath routes, so we could see Olave really being a field stretcher this year.
Yeah, is this wide receiver room going to be enough to kind of boost up Derek Carr?
Well, so Michael Thomas has played less than 500 snaps the last 3 seasons, but he was all-pro in consecutive years before that, ranking second in yards per route run in the 2018 season and leading all wide receivers in yards per route run in the 2019 season. So if Thomas is healthy, this is a pretty solid 1-2 punch for Derek Carr. Now, it gets a little bit bleak in this receiving group after Olave and Thomas, after they let Callaway, Troutman, and Hardy walk. So they're going to need a leap from tight end Juwan Johnson.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Juwan Johnson?
Johnson improved by nearly a half yard per route run during his first 3 seasons, and the Saints will definitely need him to continue on that positive trajectory to become above average at this receiving group. Because basically what's going to happen if Johnson does not become a league average-ish tight end is that opposing secondaries will be able to devote so many resources to Michael Thomas and Olave, forcing, Derek Carr into checkdowns to, you got the depth chart up right now, checkdowns to Rashid Shaheed or Foster Moreau are not going to make this an explosive offense at all.
What are your thoughts on this O-line and how they played last year and kind of what we can expect in 2023?
So this O-line feels solid to me, per usual. They finished between 9th and 17th in pass blocking efficiency each of the last 3 seasons. And each starter looks good, but not great. And so this is kind of one of those, it's not a star power offensive line, but there's also no weak links. It looks like they're going to roll with last year's first-round pick, Trevor Penning, at left tackle instead of James Hurst. And Hurst was good last year. I mean, he finished 24th in pass blocking efficiency. Penning was a raw prospect out of Northern Iowa. He showed flashes last year, particularly in the run blocking game, but he only got 124 snaps, and the Liz Frank injury on his right foot that he suffered in the regular season finale could hinder him even to start this season. So they've got good depth there, and it remains to be seen if Penning can be a starting left tackle in this league, but at least Hurst is the floor of what they'll get at that position.
Yeah, and so we look at running back here. Kamara's got this looming suspension, but what are your thoughts on the guys they've brought in? And if Kamara misses time, is this going to hurt them?
Well, Kamara does give them that edge and helps them so much in that screen game that Carmichael loves to use. But they did bring in Jamal Williams, who's a solid league average-ish running back. So I really just think that, even if Kamara gets suspended, this offense isn't going to take a massive hit, and it's just going to come down to the quarterback.
So what is it going to what are we going to need from Derek Carr this year to kind of make this Saints offense succeed?
Well, Carr averaged 6 yards per pass play his first 4 seasons in the NFL before making a leap in John Gruden's offense, and he gained 6.9 yards per pass play from 2018 to 2021. So that's almost a full yard every drop back better in the John Gruden system than Carr was prior to John Gruden. Now, Carr regressed in the Josh McDaniel system last year, and it remains to be seen whether Pete Carmichael will be able to get the same production that we saw out of Carr under Gruden. So, we're just going to have to monitor how that pairing goes. We currently have Carr rated as a league average quarterback going into 2023. And we also have his supporting cast ranked slightly above average, but the Carmichael, their play caller, is probably slightly below average.
Well, what do you think about this Dennis Allen defense?
So the Saints defense is ranked better than average in points allowed all 6 seasons I've been handicapping the NFL at Dr. Bob Sports. I mean, that's incredible consistency, but this might be the year we finally see Dennis Allen's group fall off. So they lose interior defender David Onyemata and edge Marcus Davenport, and both of those guys rank second and third on the team in pressures.
Well, they do bring in Nathan Shepard and Kalen Saunders. How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't think that Shepard or Saunders is going to be able to replace the production of Onyemata and Davenport. Those guys are pretty much replacement level bodies on the interior. They did draft Brian Breesy as well in the first round, but it takes interior guys in this range some time usually to develop. So Breesy could be, down the road, maybe, in December, he could be making an impact on this defensive line. But right now I'm seeing a lot more production out the door than they bring in this offseason.
Yeah, well, they still have Cam Jordan. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, Cam Jordan has made the Pro Bowl in 6 consecutive seasons, but he's going into his age 34 season. So at some point, his production is going to drop off. It could be this year, might not be. So we just have to monitor that. And speaking of old age, second team All-Pro linebacker Demario Davis will also be going into his age 34 season, and we could see a drop off from him as well at some point in the future. So it's really just, when we're looking at this Saints defense, it's can these old guys hang on and continue to provide the Saints with excellent production, or are we going to see Cam Jordan and Demario Davis fall into that league average area?
Yeah, well, let's look at the secondary here. What do you think their results could be here this year? Because they still have some really good names back out here.
Yeah, so we talked about how many question marks there are in the front seven, but I love this secondary. Tyrann Mathieu remains as one of the league's best safeties after he moved from Kansas City to New Orleans last offseason. Marcus May is clearly an above-average safety, and he's worth probably about a half point above replacement level. Marshawn Lattimore is one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL when healthy. Nickelback Bradley Roby showed extremely effective coverage in Dennis Allen's system, conceding only 0.8 yards per cover snap in the slot last year. Now, one worry in this secondary is who's going to play boundary cornerback opposite Marshawn Lattimore, but I think whoever wins the battle between Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo should be passable. So the outcome of this defense is not going to rely on this secondary. It's going to rely on can this front seven be slightly below average, or is this front seven in the bottom 5 in the NFL?
Yeah, so where should we set our expectations for the Saints as a whole in 2023?
Well, another thing that's not going to help this defense is that the Saints play, obviously their 8 home games are in a dome, but they also play 5 road games in a dome. And their only game outdoors in the last 2 months of the season is in Tampa Bay. So that's a lot of favorable weather conditions for the Saints, which will help the offense, but hurt the defense. But overall, the Saints have one of the easiest schedules I've seen. It's kind of like we saw with the Eagles last year. There's 10 teams in the NFL, so almost a third of the league, with 25-1 or better odds to win the Super Bowl. And none of those teams are on the Saints schedule this year. They basically miss all of the elite quarterbacks. So the market has the Saints going into this season 1 point worse than an average team. But even then, because of the schedule, they're still a clear favorite to win the NFC South.
All right, well, let's move on to the Atlanta Falcons. So the Falcons win total is set at 8.5 after going 7-10, and they finished 21st in weighted DVOA. This was the Falcons' first season since 2007 without Matt Ryan, and they replaced him with Netflix star Marcus Mariota. Mariota Mariota took them to 5-8 and did his job bridging the gap while they were waiting to move on to rookie Desmond Ritter. Ritter went 2-2 and into the season with consecutive wins. So this offense is littered with first-round weapons. Where should we set the expectations for Ritter?
So the Falcons offense finished 19th in market to end last season. And the conventional wisdom is that Ritter can't be worse than what we saw from Mariota, and that this unit is going to jump to at least league average. However, I'm not sure this narrative is true. Ritter was actually much worse than Mariota last season. Mariota had a 50% success rate, which ranked 12th in the NFL, compared to Ritter's 42% success rate, which ranked 38th. So, I mean, during the QB carousel this offseason, the Falcons bring in Taylor Heinicke, which tells me that they believe in Ritter making a second-year leap, because if they didn't, they probably would have tried to get a QB in there that was better than the quality of Taylor Heinicke. But, you know, he's got a pretty wide range of outcomes for the 2023 season. And certainly in training camp, we've seen him miss a lot of throws already.
Well, I don't think they're going to make him throw the ball too much. So should we expect the same production on the ground that they had last year?
Yeah, well, I don't know that the Falcons will be able to maintain a ground game nearly 5 points above league average like they had last season, according to our metrics. It's harder. Rushing isn't as sticky year to year as passing, and opposing defensive coordinators have had a whole offseason to diagnose Arthur Smith's running attack on film. So I wouldn't expect the ground game to be, elite like we saw last season, but I certainly think they're still an above average rushing offense.
Yeah, well, they have a lot of first-round picks, as I said earlier, as receivers, a tight end, receiver, and then also the running back is a great pass catcher. So what are your thoughts on London, Pitts, and Bijan?
Well, yeah, like you said, the weapons in this passing game are pretty solid. I mean, Drake London was very impressive last year. He finished 12th in yards per route run as a rookie. And we saw Kyle Pitts go from gaining 1,000 yards and averaging 9.3 yards per target as a rookie to averaging just 6.0 yards per target in 2022. And that was because Pitts had only 59% of his targets last year deemed catchable, which ranked 37th among qualifying tight ends. So basically, when almost half of your targets are not even deemed catchable, you're not going to be able to repeat the level of performance that he had as a rookie. And we can kind of put a lot of that blame on Marcus Mariota, which is why a lot of people expect Pitts to bounce back. Now, that's assuming that Ritter or Heinicke is going to be more accurate than Mariota, which is not necessarily a given, I think. But overall, Pitts in a vacuum is one of the best tight ends in the NFL. And I would certainly have him top 5 among tight ends going into 2023.
Yeah, it feels like we've just been waiting on that Pitts just blow up here. So maybe this will be the one if he can get some good quarterback play. But what do you think about the rest of the pass catchers that they have on this team? Is it going to be enough?
I even like the guys past Drake London and Kyle Pitts. I mean, we look at Matt Collins. He's one of the most underrated vertical field stretchers in the NFL. Hollins ranked 23rd among wide receivers in EPA per target last season, just above Tyler Lockett. And we've seen tight end Jonnu Smith be really effective in Arthur Smith's offense before. Jonnu Smith gained 1.82 yards per route run in 2019, ranking 8th among tight ends when both of those guys were in Tennessee. So overall, there's a lot to like about this Falcons receiving corps.
Yeah, and the O-line is returning a lot of production. How do you feel about the protection for Ritter this year?
Yeah, so Atlanta returns 4 of 5 starters on the offensive line that ranked 4th in pass blocking efficiency a season ago. So as long as rookie Matthew Bergeron isn't a complete dud, this group should be pretty solid once again.
Okay, so taking a step back, looking at this offense as a whole, what can we expect in 2023?
So, I mean, I've been going back and forth about this because I like a lot of the pieces, but if Ritter's awful, which he was 38th in quarterback success rate last year, and he gets a whole offseason to improve, but if he is truly not a good quarterback, then they're going to have to, bench him for Taylor Heineke. And we know Taylor Heineke is the 25th best quarterback, in the league, just from watching him, maybe not exactly 25th, but we in that range, just from watching him play these past couple of years. So I would say that, Heineke coming in and playing point guard for this offense, giving, about the 25th best quarterback in the league production is the floor. And if Ritter can make a leap, this offense certainly has top 10-ish ceiling.
So this defense has made a lot of additions, and that should bring some improvement for this year. What are your thoughts on the addition of new defensive coordinator Ryan Nielsen?
Yeah, so I'm honestly more bullish on this defense than I maybe am on the offense. They bring over Ryan Nielsen from New Orleans to call the plays. Nielsen has been the defensive line coach for the Saints, and we should see some of that same cover two man stuff that they run in New Orleans. And I think this defense finally has some talent after so many games of it just being Grady Jarrett out there with a bunch of scrubs these past few seasons.
Do you like the additions of David Onyemata and Calais Campbell?
Yeah, so those are two big guys on the interior that they can put next to Grady Jarrett, and those three players combined for 114 pressures last season. So the Falcons go from not really having a pass rush at all in recent NFL history to having potentially the best interior pass rush in the NFL.
Yeah, they kind of balled out in free agency. They also they made some changes in the secondary as well. What are your thoughts on these additions?
Yeah, so on the back end, we get a change of scenery for two former first-round pick cornerbacks, Jeff Okudah and Mike Hughes, to play alongside A.J. Terrell, who was second-team All-Pro in 2021 before having kind of a disappointing year last year. But they also signed Jesse Bates, who graded as PFF's 10th best safety last season. So all of a sudden, this looks like an above-average secondary to me. We know Nielsen is going to get the most out of this defensive line. So this defense is pretty exciting to me on paper.
Well, do you think the Falcons made enough changes to win this division?
Yeah, so the market basically right now thinks that the Falcons are 1.5 worse than the Saints, but I think the gap is probably much closer than that. So they could challenge. I would still make the Saints a favorite to win this division, but the Falcons can challenge them for that, and it really is just going to come down to what Ritter can give them.
All right, let's look at the Carolina Panthers. So the Panthers win total is set at 7.5 after going 7-10, and they finished 23rd in weighted DVOA. Last year, the Panthers started 1-4 and then fired head coach Matt Rule. And then the team moved to Steve Wilkes to be the interim coach, and he took the team 6-6 the rest of the way. Things are looking a lot more different than they were a year ago. CMC and DJ Moore are gone, but they've added first overall pick Bryce Young and a new head coach in Frank Reich. What are your thoughts?
So the 2022 draft broke a 4-year consecutive streak of quarterbacks being drafted first overall. And then Bryce Young was drafted first overall in the 2023 draft. And obviously, Bryce is an extremely unique prospect due to his size, but I haven't spent as much time on his film as NFL evaluators. So I think it's fair to just kind of assume that Bryce Young is going to give you the average level of production as we've seen from recent first overall quarterbacks, which would be Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, and Trevor Lawrence. And we can just look at what those guys finished as rookies in EPA per play. So Baker finished 20th, Kyler finished 22nd, Burrow finished 21st, and Trevor finished 28th. So to start the season, we have Bryce Young rated as the 26th best quarterback in the NFL, slotting in just behind more experienced first-round picks like Kenny Pickett and Jordan Love. And I think Reich is an above-average play caller, so he should get the most out of Young. I'm saying I don't expect this to be a Trevor Lawrence with Urban Meyer situation.
Yeah, I don't think you can find a coach as bad as Urban Meyer to ruin a player. But how do you feel about the receivers that Young's going to have around him?
Yeah, well, there's a ton of question marks in this receiving group after they traded DJ Moore to move up to that first overall pick. So Adam Thielen looked pretty washed last year in Minnesota, gaining just 1.06 yards per route run, which ranked last among qualifying receivers. And it looks like he's the number one option for Bryce Young. So they also add DJ Shark and Hayden Hurst, but both of those guys are barely above replacement level in my opinion. So they're going to need a huge leap from either Terrence Marshall or Laviska Shenault. And one of those guys basically has to establish themselves as a top 50 wide receiver, or this could get ugly.
Yeah, I remember when Laviska was drafted, I mean, he was a borderline first-round draft pick. And then I remember when he was on the Jags, their coaching staff literally compared him to Anquan Bolden and Andre Johnson, and look at him now.
Yeah, I think a lot of fantasy football players would be familiar with Laviska Shenault just based on the amount of hype that he's gotten throughout the years. But if he puts it all together finally in this offense, it could be kind of a breakout season for Shenault, but we certainly haven't seen it from him yet in his NFL career.
No, we've not. But what are your thoughts on the big guys that are going to be protecting Bryce Young this year?
Yeah, so there's a lot to like about the Panthers' offensive line, bringing back all 5 starters from a unit that finished 5th in pass blocking efficiency last year. So Ike Mekwonu struggled out of the gates as a rookie, surrendering a 9.3% pressure rate in September last season, but the left tackle settled in nicely and allowed only a 3.3% pressure rate the rest of the way. And meanwhile, PFF graded Taylor Moton as the 3rd best pass blocking right tackle in the NFL last year. So at least on the tackles, they have a chance to be really, really good this year. And I think that this interior is good enough as well.
Do you like that they added Evero as the defensive coordinator this year?
Yeah, so Ejiro Evero ranked number 1 in our defensive play calling metrics last year, which was a major surprise to me, as I thought that defensive play calling would be a downgrade after they lost, or I should say fired Vic Fangio in Denver. Evero, basically what he did was he combined like these creative pressure packages along with disguised coverage looks very effectively. So he basically did the best parts of Fangio's defense and just spammed them even further than Fangio would have. And then I would say that the talent on this Panthers defense is equal to or better than what Evero had last season in Denver. So it really could be an exciting year for this Panthers defense. I mean, you look at it, they already had Brian Burns, who had 67 pressures, which ranked 10th among edge defenders last year. Derek Brown, graded as PFF's 7th best interior defender. Linebackers Shaq Thompson and Frankie Louvu both finished top 10 in run stops. And J.C. Horn is a top 20-ish cornerback. So there's already a lot there for the Carolina defense.
Yeah, well, they also added Von Bell and Eric Rowe.
Yeah, so Bell and Rowe come over and join a safety group that was already solid with Jeremy Chin and Xavier Woods. And I could see this team playing a lot of big nickel, big dime packages, which is basically getting a lot of extra safeties onto the field, which I kind of feel like is the future of NFL defense, getting as many of those hybrid players as you can out there to maximize the amount of guys you have that are both solid in coverage, but won't get blown up if the opposing offensive coordinator calls a physical run play. So Evero is the kind of forward-thinking defensive coordinator that I think can maximize what the personnel that they have on this Panthers defense.
Yeah, well, any final thoughts on the Panthers going into 2023?
I'm looking at the Panthers, and honestly, just going back to our NFC North preview, this team profiles pretty similarly to the Packers, in my opinion, which is basically that they have an unproven young quarterback with draft pedigree, a weak receiver group, but a good offensive line, and a defense that could be fun if everything clicks into place. So I would bet that one of the Panthers or Packers makes the playoffs while the other is drafting in the top 10, and it's likely just going to come down to who's better, Jordan Love or Bryce Young.
All right. Well, let's move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucs win total is set at 6.5 after going 8-9 and finishing 25th in weighted DVOA. The Bucs started the year 2-0, but would go on that 1-5 skid in the middle of the season. Brady was able to bring the team back to get enough wins to be at the top of the division for the second straight season. Then Tom Brady would play in his final football game, we hope. And they lost to the Cowboys in the first round. So Brady is finally retired, and the team has moved on to the Oklahoma Sooner legend, Baker Mayfield. What are your thoughts on the Bucs for this year?
Yeah, well, the Bucs were basically a slightly above average team in market to end last season, but after losing Brady and bringing in Baker, the market now has them bottom five, in basically power rated bottom five after you look at all the spreads for the 2023 season that they put out there. So the market has basically said that drop from Brady to Baker is massive.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair thing to say. But let's look at this offense. What are your thoughts on this O line with Jensen coming back?
Yeah, so they have one of the best tackles in the NFL with Tristan Wirfs. And like you said, they're getting back starting center Ryan Jensen, who got hurt before week one last year, and he missed the entirety of the season. But there's massive question marks at the other three spots along this offensive line. So only three guards in the league surrendered more sacks than Matt Filer did last season with the Chargers. Second round rookie Cody Mock will be the other starting guard, and he played not a starting
God.
Cody Mock. Cody Mock, the god. No, actually, look up a picture of Cody Mock. He is a god in his own right. But anyways, Cody Mock will be the other starting guard, and he played FCS in college, so it will likely take some time adjusting to NFL athletes. And then Luke Goedeke was in contention for the worst interior offensive lineman to get more than 300 snaps in the NFL last year. So it won't get any easier for Goedeke bumping out to right tackle. And Wirfs is great, but he'll be going to an unnatural spot at left tackle. So there's just a ton of question marks on this offensive line.
Do they give out the award for worst interior offensive lineman, or is that not a thing yet?
I think they should. I think they should. We talked in the Cardinals preview about how Froholt maybe was in contention for that, and then Goedeke obviously out there in contention. So get those guys up at a podium and let them fight it out to see who's the worst interior offensive lineman from the 2022 season.
Maybe we can hold our own award show. But do you think either Baker or Trask, whoever is the starter, will be able to support these receivers this year?
Yeah, so we talked about how bad this offensive line is going to be, but I do think that this is an above average group of receivers. I mean, they still have Mike Evans, who's had over 1,000 yards during all 9 of his years in the league, and Chris Godwin has finished top 10s in yards per route run from the slot each of the last 2 seasons. So you got those 2 guys. I'd say Russell Gage and Cade Otton at tight end are replacement level guys, but when you have Evans and Chris Godwin, those 2 alone are going to put your receiving group at slightly above average.
Yeah. Are you going to be changing your thoughts on this team depending on who is playing quarterback at different times of the year?
Well, I think we know that Baker at this point is a bottom quartile quarterback in the NFL. So if Trask beats him out, it's likely because he's at least giving the production we'd expect from Baker with a fatter right tail distribution. So that is to say that he has more upside. But he would still, at least be giving you, roughly the 28th best quarterback in the league production. So I don't think we'll be changing our mind on this offense much, regardless of who wins this QB battle in camp. But I guess you have to be open to the possibility that Kyle Trask is a very good player and just fell to the second round last year and, could be an average quarterback in the NFL. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and there's been some changes on this defense, but there's still a lot of talent here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so they had some minor secondary pieces leaving this offseason, but the defense still has solid talent, and Todd Bowles is a solid defensive coach. I mean, you look at it, Levante David, linebacker, and interior defender Vita Vea are both all-pro caliber. Secondary guys like Antoine Winfield, Jamel Dean, and Carlton Davis have all been above average throughout their careers and are still 26 years old or younger. They add Ryan Neal, who had the highest grade of any safety, according to PFF, last season. Shaquille Barrett only played half of last year, but he finished 4th among edge defenders, racking up 75 pressures in 2021. So they'll be hoping that former first-round pick Joe Tryon-Shoyinka can make a leap in his 3rd season across from Barrett.
Yeah, I mean, the market kind of seems like they're out on Tampa. Are you with the market, or you kind of disagree?
When we look up and down this roster, I mean, you have the Our Lads page pulled up right now. This team kind of feels like, the Ron Rivera era in Washington to me, which is basically those teams have hovered around a -3, 3 points worse than average in market for years now. And it's, when we look at it, it's a defensive coach, a solid receiving core that has to deal with a substandard quarterback and an offensive line with pieces, but also clear weak links. So that basically describes the last few seasons of Washington, and it is what we're seeing right now in Tampa Bay. So the market currently says that this team is worse than that. The market's saying that the Bucs are 4 points worse than average, or even worse, and so that might be a little bit too low in my opinion. I'm not so sure that the Bucs should be slated in as having a top 5 pick in next year's draft, like the market seems to be implying. But to me, if they can add, one more piece to this secondary so that defenses can't expose Nickelback D. Delaney as a weak link. Bulls has already said that if no one, goes out and takes that Nickelback job in training camp, then they're open to adding someone in the free agent market there. If they can add that, this defense is pretty solid. And Baker's not going to knock your socks off, but he's a decent receiving core. Offensive line, question marks there. But overall, I think this Bucs team weirdly might be a little bit underrated going into the 2023 season.
Yeah, as a Chiefs fan, I think I still have some PTSD from that Super Bowl against the Bucs. So I will not be sleeping on the Bucs this year. I don't doubt them. I've watched that defense torture Patrick Mahomes. So I think they could surprise some people here. But I think that will do it for our NFC South preview. As always, thank you for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't.